In this week's episode, I am a guest on another podcast called the Death to Vanilla podcast, hosted by Steve Burkhart. I get into a lot of different things about copywriting, including the contrast between various types of copywriting specialties, including SEO copywriting versus conversion copywriting. I also discuss how to craft compelling headlines and hero sections, and especially how to understand market sophistication, how to apply that to your copywriting. And we get into how to cater to different types of reader behaviors. And we get into also how to find the right clients, the balance between being grammatically correct and using a conversational tone, which don't always align with each other. Well, let's get into it.
Well, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Death to Vanilla podcast. And I have an awesome guest on today. She's going to give her perspective on marketing differently and just doing things differently that's helped her get noticed, and just her different approach to copywriting. So she's got a company called Workx. Her name is Linda Malone, and she has taken the next half hour to be able to share with us, and we're excited. So thank you, Linda, for being on the show. Appreciate you jumping on today.
I appreciate it. It's going to be fun.
Cool. So tell us a little bit more about Workx.
The Workx is, I'm a certified conversion copywriter. I spent about 20 years doing content writing before I became a copywriter. And so I did a lot of print sort of writing for a lot of the magazines until everything tanked in the late, around 2008. Then I had an online business, which taught me about writing for an online business, especially since I really didn't know what I was doing at that time. There's a huge difference between the content and copywriting. And I had to learn all of that. And I was so intrigued by copywriting, and especially from a B2B business perspective, that I said, why not just go all in on this? And here I am. So
you've turned your back on content writing. But
I haven't turned my back on it. It's a part of what I do.
Right.
Hey, we need both, and there is an overlap, but content is really it's more for informational and entertainment purposes. And it doesn't, it's more for brand building. When you have copywriting, it's really for revenue. And it's just to get people to take action and to say yes to your offer, basically, especially with conversion copywriting.
Right. Well, and way to lead into the question, right? Good job. So, yeah, I mean, because my knowledge of copywriting is pretty rudimentary. Ended up picking up a book on it a while ago and just was super fascinated by just the human psychology element, and just the years of this art and science developing to where it is now. Especially as it's been repurposed throughout the years from, newspapers to magazines to billboards to now online, and, the consumer attention span is lower. So you got to say more in less time and be more convincing, and there's more noise and all these other things are added on. So I kind of know that there's copywriting as a whole, but you specialize in conversion copywriting. So I'd love to hear more about how that's different than other kinds of copywriting.
Well, there's overlap with all of them. And there's some people that say that conversion copywriting is bogus. It's a term that was established by Joanna Wiebe, who is the founder of Copy Hackers. She was my coach. And so she worked for a lot of SaaS companies and was calling her style of copywriting conversion-focused copywriting, and she abbreviated to conversion copywriting. Long story short, now she has I'm certified through her. So that's why I say certified. But it is really focused on getting your prospect to say yes to your offer. So everything I write is geared to, it's not necessarily revenue producing, but usually it is. But it's either say yes to your webinar, yes to your, if you have lead magnets, anything that requires somebody to take action. And so it's versus something like direct response, which is what it's compared mostly to. Direct response, those are the ads you see all over the place. They don't take into account a lot of the things that conversion copywriting takes into account. So, and we'll get into that in a little while, but it's like if you see a Burger King ad or any ad like that, it's a blanket ad. I mean, whoever sees it, If it attracts you, it does, but they don't take into account the customer like conversion copywriting does. It's not driven by data. It's just out there. So that's direct response. And then you have like SEO copywriting, which is I worked with a client who had their whole website written by an SEO copywriter. And so you're using, the words so Google picks up on it. But then what happens is if Google recognizes the website, okay, great. So they get people to the site, then what happens? So the SEO, the copy was written in such a way, because I ended up redoing his whole site for him. And we include, as a conversion copywriter, I include some of the SEO keywords, but it's not based completely on that. It's usually pretty obvious when a site is really SEO, like the same phrase is used over and over, but you want it to convert. So everything I do is geared toward conversions.
Okay. No, I think that makes some good sense. So, and then, copywriting for people who are just like less familiar with it, right? Because like for me, like, it was a little bit of like a mystery box, if you will, when I was first getting into it. And so just to kind of like sum it up a little bit, like copywriting is essentially just like crafting words to be persuasive in some sort of way. Is that like maybe an oversimplification, but that's essentially what it is?
It's part of it. I mean, okay. The biggest difference is the research that goes into it. So it's not about finding the best combination of words as it is finding your customer's words. So for example, when I start working with a new client, I take 4 to 6 weeks just for the research to dig into their customer, their competitors, who's saying, what they're saying on social media about this particular product or service or the related one, something similar to it. And then I start pulling quotes from, and I speak to customers, in interviews. So I get firsthand accounts. That's the hardest part to get because people don't want to talk usually. It takes a while, but you get the best information that way. So everything I write has to be backed by either analytics or something somebody said to me. And there are times when I'm writing something and I think, this sounds really good. And then I ask myself, did somebody say this? Would somebody say this? If the answer is no, I have to can it. You have to put your ego aside. But that's the difference, when you're writing within a company. Somebody asked me recently, like, is there a disadvantage or disadvantage to writing to a copywriter that works within an agency? And the problem is when you're in the whole environment of that company, it's a different perspective. You need that outside person to take a look and say, okay, this is, your customers are saying this, but you guys think it's this. And so it's a whole different way of coming up with like a value proposition, and that, which is the basis of all the copy, what differentiates you.
Right. I guess the irony in all of that is that you would think that someone who's inside the company would know all those things, but if they did, they probably wouldn't be having the issues they're having with their copy converting. So it's as odd as it seems to bring in the outside perspective, I'm sure on some level, like if they were doing the research they needed to do, they wouldn't be having those problems. So and they just may not even have the systems and processes in place that you do to do that, which I think is really good. That makes so much sense. I literally was watching a video the other day, and the guy was talking about like how he does Q&A shows specifically for the purpose of like getting direct question and answer stuff that he's able to use for content later on. He's like, it's not that I'm not consuming content, is that I'm consuming it from the source as opposed to watching someone else's podcast or someone else's work or something like that. Because you have no idea, like, if they did any research to talk about the things that they talked about. And that's where you're talking about, you do your own research. So that way you're able to craft the words the right way using the customer's words, which is so powerful because that's how it resonates.
Yeah. A lot of times I'll be interviewing somebody and they'll say something where right away I know that is going to end up in a headline because it's so like a eureka moment. And they don't even know they've said it usually. They'll just say something about the product or service. And I'm like, okay. And I make a note because I'll record it and I'll just make a note where that was. And,
That's awesome.
it's you get the best information. Because there's a saying, and I forget, I read it somewhere, it's not from me, but about how companies inhale their own fumes. Like everyone's patting themselves on the back for coming up with a great line or some great copy, when actually they're in their own little ecosystem, and they're not really, considering the research like I do. And even when they do research, and this is the other thing, I've had companies say to me, we've done all the research, but the research is done for a specific reason. When I do research, I'm looking for something that they're not looking for. And so they can give me the surveys and the statistics and all the analytics from, Google Analytics. And I mean, it helps, and I definitely use it, but it still comes down to talking to people. It always does.
For sure. Well, like you said, it's that magic phrase that they say that ends up becoming the catalyst for a title, rather than just like the data points,
right.
Which, like you said, are helpful, but like that doesn't help the language of the person. I remember your post on that. I thought that was so funny. It's like, we did all the research for you.
We've done all the research.
Like, sure,
I've had that happen with big companies too, and they dump all this research on me, and it's interesting, but it's still, I'm not finding what I need in it, and it's pretty amazing to consider how the volume of it.
The more people I talk to, the more I realize that the intimidation factor that I have set up in my own mind, no one forced me, I set it up myself, that somehow big businesses have it all together, is just simply not true. And so for all the creators out there who are intimidated by working with big companies, they need just as much help as anyone else. One would think they don't need it because they could hire all the talent they need, but they do. And I think a lot of it boils down to the politics inside the departments, but that's a whole nother discussion. That's a rabbit trail right there. So to double back, you had made an interesting comment about direct response being kind of just like general and just kind of like whoever sees it, sees it. But there was something, when we were talking before we started this podcast about conversion copywriting being a little bit more considerate, a little more strategic in how it's done. And so you had used the phrase, stages of awareness, I believe is what it was. And so dive in a little bit about like how you work with that concept to be able to formulate the proper structure or words or what have you for your copywriting.
Well, there's 5 stages of decision awareness. So this means where the person is in their decision-making process. So would be when they get to your site, where are they? The first stage is unaware. Usually you won't even hear from these people because this is someone who doesn't, and I always use the analogy of a fitness person, somebody who is out of shape, has an awful diet, and doesn't care. They're unaware. You're not going to get them if you sell a fitness product because they're not in pain, which is the second stage, which is pain aware. That's where people start looking for a solution. They're like, okay, it's January 2nd. It's time. This is the year, I'm going to do that marathon, get in shape. And so they start looking for a solution. The third phase, level of awareness, is a solution aware. So now they know there's a solution out there. And so that maybe they're looking at your solution, they're comparing it, they're making charts, they're, doing all their research. And then product aware is they're aware of your solution, but they're not quite sure it's for them. And so the final stage is where it's the best stage, which is most aware. They're like, okay, this is, your product is what they want. And now it's just a matter of what kind of, do you have payment plans? How am I going to afford this? Is there any, kind of guarantee? So then they're actually looking into how to get that, get the actual product. What's interesting is you can go from, there's situations where you go from unaware to most aware, which would be like you get home and your house is flooded. Okay, so you're not going to go shopping around for a plumber. You are going to just, you're suddenly like, I need somebody right now. You're going to get somebody. And so you just jump from not even thinking about your plumbing in your house. I always love that analogy because you don't think about it at all until it's there. And you just, you can jump over all those levels. But the whole thing with writing for each level of awareness is that, especially with a long form sales page, people complain, oh, these pages are so long. But what they do, the psychology behind it, is to move people through each stage, except for the unaware. So you start with pain aware. And so there's formulas that are, the most popular one is the pain, agitation, and then solution, PAS formula. And so the copy would address that pain. And so if it's a fitness thing, because I used to have a fitness business, so it would be something about, and it's, you have to really know how to handle it. And again, it's about using the words your customers are using or potential customers. You don't want to make them feel bad, but you want them to remember why they're there. So it's like, tired of laying on the floor trying to zip up your pants and, or just describe the scene. Like that's how I used to have a lot of my copy. And then it's also the imagery that you need. And the things that I found is that people don't like the ones where you're trying to zip up your pants. I mean, it's just embarrassing and it's kind of humiliating. So I would put like a stack of jeans with an apple on top. That was one of the images that was successful. So you hit the pain point and then you agitate a little bit. Like, okay, so if you let this go, where you're going to be next year, and you start really getting into how it's going to affect their life. And then you present the solution. So as you go through it, you're taking them, through, as your copy goes on, you're taking them through these different levels. And then they realize, okay, there's a solution. You have a product. And then the more further down the page, okay, this sounds like it's for me. And so that's why there's a whole sequence of events that has to happen in the copy, just to bring them through those different levels.
For sure. Yeah, I've literally felt the exact same way. And in fact, the funny thing is when you talk about like using the proper language and connecting with people, all I can think about, and maybe this is completely random, but like all I can think about is like the comedians who like have like the situational humor where like everyone's like, oh, like I totally have that happen to me too. And it's like, because like so many comedians talk about being overweight and just like how relatable that ends up being because of like they're experiencing the same problems they have. Like I forget the one guy was talking about like how the untucked dress shirt was the fat man's last stand and stuff like that. And it's just funny because like everyone's been there where like, they're like, I guess I'm untucking the shirt. And
it sounds like Jim Gaffigan.
I think it was. It totally was. He's so freaking funny. So anyway, so that makes sense. But like you talked about, there's also like that ego thing that you have to balance a little bit as well. And I think, that, we didn't talk about this, but that kind of your example of even the wrong imagery just goes back to fact that like, this is not just like a one and done type service, that there's like some like massaging and optimizing that has to happen. So for example, you use the example of choosing a different image, but what are some other things that like might have to get like shuffled around for it to like fully work, right? Because you have a fat page of content, right? And then you're going through and figuring out like where am I losing people or stuff like that. Like what kind of other things you were like massaging and optimizing?
Well, the number one thing is the headline. And on a landing page or a home page, it would be called the hero section. So that's the big piece of real estate on the top of the page. That has to capture attention. That's where I spend most of my time, whether it's an email subject line, headline, a hero section. Because if people don't stop and read it, they're not going to read anything more. 80% of people like skim. I do. Just because they don't know if this product is for them. I'm not going to read every word. I mean, some people do, but they're psychopaths. No, I don't know if they're psychopaths, but
they have more time than you and I do have, on our hands, apparently.
But what happens is the copy should have eye-catching, what they have they call them crossheads, which are, some people call them subheadings, but that's actually below the crosshead. So you want to have and pop out some of the quotes that are eye-catching, statistics that are shocking, so that when someone looks at the page, so say they read the headline, and then they're going to stop at the quotes that are pulled out, the images that they're going to review. Then if that captures their attention, they'll go back and start reading a smaller print. And so the page has to be geared for all these different decision makers. There's people who scan, people who read, like I just said, there's different categories of them, which I don't know all of them offhand, but there's people who look like humanitarian people who just look for their they're attracted to pictures of people, family photos, maybe, and something that it's like their lifestyle.
Right.
There's others who really want the statistics, the SaaS companies. I mean, a lot of people who are looking for a SaaS product are really interested in, show me the numbers kind of thing. You just have to know your audience, but you structure the page in such a way that it draws the eye through, I mean, if you had a solid block of text, no one's going to read that. But it seems to be the trend, especially with websites lately, is very little text. I'm having my website redone as we speak. It'll be launched on Monday. And I'm having a hard time just like, okay, we have to sum this up. We have space for one sentence right here. And that it's harder to do that than it is to just drone on and on. But yeah, you want to capture people visually with the page.
Yeah, I think the ironic thing for me is that what seems to be good copywriting is the exact opposite of everything I learned in school. Because like in school, you're like, write big paragraphs and like, all this other stuff. And then like you learn copywriting. It's like, say it shorter, no shorter, no shorter. Okay, now turn it into bullet points. And it's like, okay. Like, because like you said, you're arranging it for skimming. You're arranging it for people who are like, like when you sit down and read a book, like you've done that on purpose. Like you want to read it, even though I just read the other day that like a lot of people don't get past the first chapter, but it's still more intentional. Like this is kind of something where like someone maybe not as intentional, and so that like you said, they're trying to figure out if it's for them, and so they got to figure out real quick, and so a nice couple paragraphs isn't going to do it for them. It's just not fast enough. Right. But that's not what you're taught in school, so it's definitely a mindset shift for sure.
So I say that one of my viral posts on LinkedIn was when I said how Grammarly can ruin your copy. And I didn't realize people really rely on Grammarly. And I had people that were pretty angry with me. But I said that it doesn't take into account slang. It doesn't take into account the way people really talk. And they add words. Like I'm constantly fighting Grammarly because it pops up on, and I like that it catches the typos. I mean, that's a good thing.
Oh, yeah.
But there are times when I just want to just turn it off. And then I'll inevitably get a typo and go, I guess I should turn it back on. But it's not always right, is my point.
Right. I've never even used it, so I couldn't tell you. But I know some people live and die by it. So I find that Google Docs has a spell checker, so I'm not too worried about it. But interesting. That's so funny. People get offended by that stuff.
People get offended by everything, don't they?
That's true. That's true. How dare you tell me something I'm doing is not working? So the last thing I wanted to hit before we run out of time here is something that I think I've only really heard you talk about, or at least use the phrase that you've used for it, which is market sophistication. It's something, like I said, people just don't talk about it very much, and I think it's very important. So talk to us a little bit about what market sophistication is and like what people are really missing out on by not taking that seriously.
There's high and low levels of market sophistication. So a low level of market sophistication is if you sell a product or service that people have not heard of, or it's new, or it's a new version of something that is very unfamiliar. And then a high level, I mean, think about, fitness equipment. Again, I always go back to that because I'm just so familiar with it. But if you're selling a treadmill, I mean, there's hundreds of treadmills out there. So that's a high level of market sophistication. Low level would be something like when Peloton came out. So there were all these stationary bikes, but Peloton separated itself out from the pack because it was very different. People weren't familiar with it. And the reason it's important is a couple things. One is if you're selling something that's in a high level of sophistication, like say you're a website developer, and I've worked with some people that do that, it's harder to differentiate yourself. So this is where what I do and the research I do really comes into play, because I will dig until I find why you're different and better than your competitors. And the other thing is when it comes to copy, if you have a new product, like you can also think about like battery powered cars versus gas powered. Most of us are more familiar with gas powered cars. So if it's you're selling an electric car, you need to explain more. There's a lot more for that person to learn. So if you're selling a product on your site and they're not familiar with it, you have to go into more detail with the copy. You can't just hit them up with what it is. Here, buy this. Well, I don't know anything about it. So there's a lot more explaining. So those two things really come into play with the copy.
Okay.
And then also, you can tell by the number of competitors how saturated the market is. So if you put something out there and you go and you have a million competitors, so that's a high level of market sophistication and high saturation. So it's just harder. And people who do that, a lot of times I find with clients or people who are considering hiring me, I ask them, well, how are you different? And they have no idea. I mean, you have to start with that. Because if you don't know why you're different and why you're better, how are you going to sell your product? And it could just be that the niche is a little bit different. Like with me, even as a conversion copywriter, there's a million copywriters out there. So I wanted to specialize. And so I niched down to conversion copywriting. And I wanted to make sure I was good. I became certified. And when I was certified through Copy Hackers, they told me I was the first person in 2 years to become certified, because you have to go through this process where you have to submit all this copy for approval by their team. And so I had to do Facebook ads, landing pages, home pages, long form sales page, and it all had to be approved and critiqued before they said, okay, you're certified. So that's what I did to differentiate myself. But you have to do that in a field like this.
For sure. So it's not, so it's like a mix of things. Like part of it is that it's the differentiation part that's harder if the market sophistication is higher, but it's also just, so I guess that's the seesaw. It's a high level of market sophistication. The difficulty is differentiating yourself. If it's a low level, it's properly educating someone to the point where they can start. It's almost like creating the need in a lot of ways. Like when the first, iPhone came out, and it's like, well, like it's really cool, but like, do I need to touch the screen? And then if like, yes, I do, because it's awesome. Right. But yeah, it was like the first thing, and it was like having an app store was like a really big deal, brand new concept. That's why on Steve Jobs' keynote, it was like, there's an app for that. There's an app for that. There's an app for that, because it was like reinforcing that idea over and over in the head of like, hey, this is a new concept. Think of something. There's an app for it. And so, so I'm assuming that like for like the low sophistication type things, there's like, does your copy end up being longer, or does it just like take different shape, or is there just a higher volume of different kinds of content that help in getting people educated, or how does that typically work in that situation?
I mean, it's usually more copy, but think about like the unaware, because it's almost like you're trying to sell or address people who are unaware. So I talked about that in the levels of awareness. And so that's someone who they don't even know that they need what you have. So now you have to start really, I mean, they probably, like you said, with the iPhone, so people are interested, but I don't know, is this going to take off? Like when the internet first came into fruition, which I'm old enough to remember. I remember like what is, what's a social network? I remember interviewing somebody for that. I mean, and so back then it's like, who needs a website? What company needs a website? So you have to establish it. And the first couple of companies to come out with that, like Peloton now has a ton of competitors. It's like, okay, so they start like Bowflex now has a subscription, and Peloton sales are down because now everyone's copying them. But to pave the way is really hard. So it's a matter of educating, and it depends. I think you'd probably have to come at it with a number of different angles, like really get active on social media. You're going to have to probably, do some paid ads. You have to do more. Like iPhone or Apple just has to say, hey, we have a new iPhone coming out tomorrow, and they'd have lines out the door that people don't even ask questions. I don't care. It's like, I have an iPhone 10, and every time I see the iPhone 13 commercial, I'm like 3 incarnations behind. I have to get on the stick. I don't even know what's the difference. I don't even care.
I have an 8, so I'm so behind. I'm like the version they're gonna like start just like not even supporting anymore soon.
Right.
Well, I mean, I think when you were describing some of that, it just makes me think of the fact that is it just that like people like because when you talked about like the pain, the was it pain something solution? I don't remember it.
Product aware.
Okay, yeah. So, is it just that the people don't even know that they have that pain, and then so that's what you're trying to like actually help them see for the first time?
I mean, if they don't feel like they have a problem, to help somebody see it is really a losing battle. You really, when I think about, people who, I'd go walking around and my husband would say, oh, that person looks like they're out of shape. They could use your help. I said, I'm the last person that they want to hear from. They don't care. And even at the gym. So I worked and I was getting paid at the gym, or even with my personal training clients when I was doing personal training. These people are paying me $100 an hour and I'm telling them how to do something and they're arguing with me. And it's like, people don't like being told what to do. Even when they're paying you to do it, they don't like being told. So they have to have some level of willingness to listen to you, or you're not going to get anywhere. And it's just going to be a losing battle. So they have to be willing to hear you out, consider, that's kind of an inside job. There's really nothing you can do to, force somebody.
For sure.
Because, it wouldn't be good.
That's why every business has got to find the right kind of clients. Because, it's, I always say, like for me, like business just always goes back to relationships. And it's like, have you ever tried to convince someone to date you? It usually doesn't go well. And so like someone's going to get frustrated, mad. And even if it does work, it won't last. And so I feel like for business, it's the same kind of way where it's like, if you try to like force someone to love what you're doing or force someone to try to see a pain point or whatever else, like it's just ultimately going to be frustrating, ineffective, and not work. So why even try?
Yeah, and I've tried that. At the beginning, when I first started doing copywriting, I tried doing some cold pitching, and I would do research on the company. It wouldn't be just, hey, a blanket, email, but it was never. I mean, I ended up getting 2 clients that way, but it was only because I was the right place, the right time. If they don't feel like, I would go on a website and I'd say, okay, I can make this better. And I would send them a short video. Like, this is, what I would do. They didn't ask for that though. So I rarely got a response. It could be the worst website in the world. And I've seen some pretty bad ones. If people don't see a problem, like say they're selling things like crazy, they don't see like, well, what are you going to do for me kind of thing. So
you could sell more.
What?
Said you could sell more. Like,
I know, but I did that the other day on LinkedIn. I talked about how people, you can't force somebody or convince somebody to see your value. They need to see it and feel it themselves.
True.
There's
that.
no shortcut to that. You can arm wrestle them. Maybe that would work. I don't know. I haven't tried.
I would win. So maybe that's my new technique. I've taken down some big dudes, so that would be awesome. I'm not afraid of a man who spends all day in a suit. So, cool. So let me finish up with just some like more like fun rapid fire questions, if you don't mind, just like fun stuff about you. So, tell us one book that you're reading right now, whether it's business or otherwise, that you are thoroughly enjoying.
Oh, it's funny that you say that. Where the Crawdads Sing.
I've heard of that.
I would see it on Amazon. It has like 25,000 5-star reviews. And I saw a commercial the other day. They are coming out with a movie.
Okay.
And I ended up starting to listen to the audio, and I'm reading it, and I'm completely engrossed. And it's been a while since that's happened. So it's fiction.
that is sounding so familiar. What's that about?
Well, I just started it. So it's, but it's this family, this young girl who's very poor. Her mother left. Her father is awful. And so she's trying to make her way. And in the meantime, there's kind of two stories going on. They found there's a homicide. This young boy was found in a lake, and that's the commercial that I saw. And I didn't even start reading the book before I saw that commercial. I said, that looks like it's that book I bought that I never read. And so it's well written and it's really good.
Nice. That's awesome. Very cool. Assuming you haven't seen it yet, what is your most anticipated movie of 2022 that you're wanting to watch?
Probably the new Top Gun, Maverick.
I've heard it's so good.
I've heard it's crazy good. Like, and I am not really a go to the movie theater kind of person, but 99% on Rotten Tomatoes, and people saying that there are kids standing up in their chairs cheering at the end.
Dang.
I've got to see this. So yeah.
I mean, that's a challenge. That's a classic. I have that in VHS in my house. That's well, cool.
Yeah, that movie.
I like it. And let's see here. You live here in Arizona, where I live. So, what is your favorite restaurant? Assuming you go out.
We haven't gone out here yet because it's only been 2 months we've been here, and so I don't know.
Dang, you don't have a hotspot yet. Okay, all right.
No, we're looking. In fact, we were just talking about that, my husband and I. He said we haven't gone out to dinner yet. Let's pick a place. So he's a big steak guy, and I don't eat meat. I eat fish. So he said, okay, we'll find a steakhouse that serves fish, which they do.
Sure. I mean, I would say that's
so I'm not going up to Phoenix, or I'd ask for your advice. I'm not traveling that far for dinner.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you for opening up our minds to the world of conversion copywriting, being able to talk through, because I just look at everything from a content perspective, just creating content that is able to meet people at each stage of the decision process, being able to create content that, whether visual or written, that is able to get people on the right track and understanding where they're coming from, right? Whether it's they're completely clueless about it or that they know a lot about it. And being able to take that into account and do the research to do that. So thank you. Those are all super helpful.
Thank you.
And so, thanks for being on the show.